And good morning, Gator haters throughout Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Presented today by Kroger, and as the sign on the desk says, we are go for 3 in 23. But you can't get there until you go through what is in store for Saturday, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. The rivalry game we believe matters more than any other, and we are ready to go for it here on this Friday. We think we have a really fun show planned. Jeff Sentell, we'll check in with him. Jeff, of course, already on the scene down there on Florida's First Coast, just getting ready for a fun weekend. Looking forward to being there tomorrow. Hoping to see some of you. If you see me, please come say hello. Let's enjoy being Gator haters together for a little bit tomorrow. And then, of course, if you're out and about on Sunday, enjoying some of the sunshine and the nice stuff, which I hope stays. I know there's been a little chatter lately about forecast change or something like that. Just be careful on that, I guess. But really looking to settle in and have a great time and just a wonderful weekend. So we got to talk some football here to get ready for that. So glad to have you with us for it here today. We'll also give you some final thoughts here coming up on a big weekend's worth of games there as well. We will cover all of that ground with you here today. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger on the day before Georgia plays Florida. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
The lousy, stinking Gators have a date with destiny tomorrow. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party, Georgia, Florida. It's the rivalry game that we believe matters more than any other. If you've heard me say it once, for those of you who've been with us for a number of years, you've heard me say it thousands of times. A good Georgia fan is a Gator hater, first and foremost. This rivalry means something. It's fun, of course. We love the cocktail party, but the game itself has just extra special meaning. We're going to talk about that here coming up in a little bit, the fact that as a Georgia fan, it feels really good to know that our coach right now understands that. And I think that Florida's trying to do its part to understand that too, for what it's worth. But at Georgia, this is something that Kirby Smart has just sort of had figured out for a while. And we're going to talk about that here coming up in a moment. Jeff Sentell already on the scene in Jacksonville. He'll join us here coming up in a little bit too to kind of give us the sights and sounds. I'll be leaving early tomorrow morning to be there in time for the game. And Jeff's already there, so he'll give us a little bit of a taste of that coming up here in just a little bit there as well. But prior to any of the kind of atmospheric stuff around the game, let's talk about what it's going to take for Georgia to get it done on Saturday. First of all, here's my belief. As I said to you yesterday, if you look at most Georgia-Florida games over the course of the last decade, you've got the dud from Georgia in 2014, the no-show from Florida in 2017, but for the most part, these games are competitive. Even in games in which the final margin of victory seems decisive, there are a lot of competitive moments within that game. So my expectation tomorrow is, even though I do believe Georgia to be the better of these two teams, and I do believe that 2-touchdown margin that the experts are currently telling you the point spread rests at, I believe that probably sounds about right. But the fact of the matter is, a game in which you win by 2 touchdowns does not mean you're up by 2 touchdowns the entirety of the game. And if previous Georgia-Florida games are our guide for what's going to happen on Saturday, then I believe the expectation should be that most of the moments in this game, most of the snaps in this game will occur with the outcome perhaps not in doubt. And if Georgia does build margin with its final, scoring margin, if it does build some margin here with its final result, then it's going to take it the full 60 minutes to probably get there. That's ultimately my belief. Every snap's going to matter. Every play is going to count. And everyone on both sides will be playing with the butterflies in the stomach that kind of come in a rivalry game like this, where you know the things that you do will be remembered forever and ever and ever. We still talk about Georgia-Florida games of the past on this show all the time. Georgia fans do anytime they get together. And somebody tomorrow becomes a part of the folklore that we reminisce about in tailgates 2 decades from now. That's what tomorrow is all about. We understand that. And for Georgia, it's obviously a little bit of a new look because, as I've been pretty clear about saying for a while, for the first 7 games of this regular season, first 6.5, I guess if you want to be more specific, I thought this was Brock Bowers' team. Bowers was, I believe, the best player in college football. When healthy, he still is. But for Saturday, he's not healthy, and he won't be playing. You already know that, of course. And so what we're going to see is a little bit of a redefining of what Georgia is, especially on offense. And we've kind of made the case this week that as Georgia kind of redefines itself, as Georgia looks for its new spark, the same way that Bowers pretty clearly put this team on his back when it needed him second half of the game against Auburn a few weeks ago, now someone else has got to provide that spark. And I believe the guy who's perhaps most capable of doing that, most needed to do that, and probably even most ready to do that is quarterback Carson Beck. We told you on, was it Tuesday, I guess it was, that late in the show, hopefully you got a chance to hear that it really seems like right now Beck is in a position to really see his stature within college football grow a lot over the course of the next few weeks. And I promise you, I'm not going to turn this into sort of like the kind of fun, like hype stuff we do from time to time. There's no Brocktober coming for Carson Beck. We're going to take a break from that here for a little while. I'm just simply pointing out that statistically speaking, he's already in a pretty good spot as it relates to, kind of much of what he's been able to do this season and kind of where he kind of fits into the college football landscape overall, with perhaps some room to climb here in coming weeks there as well. And as Georgia looks for kind of a new leader, so to say, as Georgia looks for its new spark offensively, it seems like Beck is poised to be that guy. And in fact, one of the reasons why we know this is because of something that wide receiver Dominic Lovett said the other day. Now, Lovett, I believe, could factor pretty heavily into tomorrow's game. He was obviously very big against Vanderbilt 2 weeks ago. And in talking about Carson Beck, in a matter of only a short few words, I thought that Lovett said something really interesting when he spoke to reporters here earlier this week about the degree to which this offense right now, maybe wide receivers in particular, but this offense, how much they're ready to be led by Beck and how much they're ready to kind of take on the persona that Carson Beck projects. This is interesting from Dominic Lovett, who's been around the SEC now for a little while. This is what he said earlier this week.
Carson doing a great job leading the team, giving us confidence, giving us swag. So we're just going to follow behind him and whatever he say, go.
Let's take that literally just for a moment. First of all, Levitt says, we're going to follow behind Carson Beck wherever he goes. Wherever he leads us, whatever mood he establishes for us, we're just going to follow with that. We're going to go with him, which is exactly kind of what you want, kind of sort of old school thinking, the idea that the quarterback sets the tone for the offense. From the purpose of Dominic Lovett there, it sounds like that's true, that wherever he leads us, we're ready to follow. That's how this team believes in its quarterback right now. That matters, and that means something. And if you want to kind of dig deep into this a little bit more and take it especially literal, he says that Carson does a good job of giving us confidence, of giving us swagger. We're borrowing that from him right now. I think that's something that Stetson Bennett was pretty good at doing. Bennett was almost always, regardless of the situation, just a kind of a cool customer, and it seems like that in the last couple of years, those two national championship seasons, when Georgia's offensive players needed to borrow that confidence, it seems like Stetson Bennett always seemed to have it on long supply to be able to give out. That's one of those things that work. But in this particular case, the person who's speaking this, I think, is pretty interesting because Lovett's one of these guys who actually you would think would have confidence of his own, and perhaps that he does. Almost certainly he does, because of the fact that he's had great success in the SEC prior to coming to Georgia. He had a big year last year for Missouri, the same way that Rod Thomas has had a big year at Mississippi State in the SEC before coming to Georgia. Guys like Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, Ladd McConkey, others have had success here at UGA, a part of national championship teams. So these guys, these pass catchers, guys that we all expect to sort of factor prominently in what happens for Georgia tomorrow, all of these guys have their own level of confidence, and yet, as Lovett says, in addition to that, you've also got a guy like Carson Beck providing his own level of swagger to us, which I think is a really interesting word. And obviously, it's the kind of thing that you hope quarterbacks can have, the kind of thing you think quarterbacks can earn. More on that in a moment. But Lovett, who would perhaps have his own confidence because of his own track record for success in the SEC, says we're still getting some of what Carson has. The confidence he has, he's supplying some of that to us. The swagger he has, he is supplying some of that to us, and I think that's really cool. And specifically in terms of what that means for Saturday's game, we know this is a homecoming. This is Carson Beck back in his hometown playing in Jacksonville. That's a really big deal, I would say. We've kind of made a big deal about it on the show at times here this week. And what Dominic Lovett also told us this week is that Carson Beck has not really held back in saying that, hey, the confidence I have, the swagger I have, that I can go out and lead our team to victory on Saturday. I need you to be ready for this moment because of what the game means to me personally. That's something that Dominic Lovett has also said Carson Beck has not shied away from, apparently talking about here this week. Here's more of Dominic Lovett on how Carson's leading this team specifically before the lousy stinking Gators on Saturday. More from Dominic Lovett.
The main thing was, like, he was like, he visited his hometown, which I can understand coming from where I came from. So he really just said he kind of wanted to just help us. He just wanted to lead us to like a victory, but he wanted to do it while having fun. But he is excited to play in his hometown. I mean, who wouldn't be? So I understand where he coming from. So that was like the big thing. He just wanted us to stay locked in, stay focused, don't overwhelm myself. But he does like want to help us win because it's in his hometown.
I mean, if I were to just kind of give you my knee-jerk reaction when I'm hearing from Dominic Lovett right there, it sounds like to me this is a quarterback back who has a really strong rapport with his wide receivers, and Dominic Lovett's a veteran guy here. Lovett's not going to give his respect over to someone who doesn't deserve it and who hasn't earned it, but it sounds like Dominic Lovett truly respects Carson Beck, really believes he's the quarterback to distribute the football where it needs to go on Saturday and beyond. I think that's kind of a cool thing. And let's not lose sight of this, that Saturday is a really big moment for Carson Beck. And while your swagger, your confidence, these things that Lovett says Beck has, they certainly help you going into Jacksonville on Saturday. The other thing we know is they're also going to be tested too, because there is a moment for every confident athlete where they are forced to ask themselves, is my confidence well earned? Do I truly deserve to be in this moment? You've perhaps heard the idea of like an imposter syndrome or something like that. That moment when you're not quite so sure you're kind of ready for the moment that you're in, and perhaps you're about to find out that you're not. I would say even great athletes maybe aren't quite totally immune to that. And there could be some moments in which, Carson Beck has to face that on Saturday too, of I have believed this is what I'm here for. I am back here to my hometown folks in Jacksonville to show them how much I've grown since I was a high school quarterback, all these years ago. And yet the Georgia-Florida game, because of the intensity of the rivalry, has a way of testing what it is you think you know about yourself. And with that in mind, I was kind of thinking about this for Carson on Saturday. If I could wish any performance on Carson, if I could go back to any kind of recent moment from Georgia history and grab that and say, hey, Carson, you go replicate this on Saturday. The thing I would want for him is what Jake Fromm did against Florida in 2018. And a lot of you remember the circumstances around that game. Georgia hadn't gotten embarrassed in its most recent game prior to that, back in 2018. Had lost by 20 points at LSU, an LSU team that was not quite the team it would become later on. A good team, but not a great team. Almost every Georgia fan was totally shell-shocked by the fact that Georgia even lost that day, and actually Georgia lost by 3 touchdowns. It was a pretty demoralizing moment for UGA. There were a lot of calls that Jake Fromm perhaps shouldn't be the starting quarterback for UGA anymore. Maybe Justin Fields needed to be that guy there at that time. Georgia was going into Jacksonville to face a Florida team that would eventually finish the year in the top 10. This is a good Florida team of Dan Mullen there that particular year, in what was Mullen's first year on the job there with the lousy stinking Gators. This is a big game against a good team with a lot of really tough questions being asked about UGA. And Jake Fromm arguably played the best game he ever played as a Georgia quarterback in that moment in which Georgia's season was kind of teetering on the brink. They'd go on to win the SEC East and almost made the college football playoff. When Jake Fromm's status as a Georgia starting quarterback was perhaps also teetering just a bit there as well. Fromm went out and played like he had swagger and played like he had confidence. But on the inside, yeah, he was feeling some anxiety. He was feeling some nervousness. He told us this 2 weeks ago on the show. This is what Jake Fromm said about that moment when he joined us last week.
A lot. There's a lot of pressure put on myself from myself, just because I wanted to play great. I didn't want to let the guys down. We had a great team with great opportunities in front of us, and I didn't want to be that guy that held us back from getting to those opportunities. So I wanted to play great, obviously, and we really went to work and had a great bye week. Man, we got a lot of reps in and figured a lot of things out, and it came up that next week big for us.
So I'll never know what it feels like to be a great athlete because obviously I wasn't one and still am not one. I'll never know what it truly feels like. But if you piece together what we're hearing from other great athletes, I do think you can get sort of a picture of what Carson Beck's going to be like on Saturday. As Dominic Lovett describes, there is confidence and swagger on the outside. As Jake Fromm describes before what was one of his biggest games ever against Florida a few years ago, there was also nervousness on the inside, pressure on the inside of what it means to play well, what it would mean not to play well. You feel that on the inside, even as you project that confidence and swagger on the outside. That's what rivalry games are all about. And the very best players, specifically the very best quarterbacks, process all of that very well. We have every reason to believe that Carson Beck also processes this very well too, feeling what he feels on the inside because he knows this could be his moment. Challenge to project on the outside what his teammates need to feed off the confidence and swagger that he provides. This really could be a big one for Carson Beck, not just because it's a homecoming, but also because it's the next big springboard to propel Georgia through all the big games that are coming up after this. It truly could be that Carson Beck's moment has arrived. And if that's true, it's arriving at exactly the right time here for UGA. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger. We're glad to have you with us. No matter how you get to us, 1st and 15, 945, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. At one point in time, I had a little bit of a bad habit of being late for our 1st and 15. But we haven't been late for the 1st and 15 in months. We've been right there, 9:45. We hit it hard every single day. We were a little late today, and that was totally my fault, so I apologize for that. But really, it's been nice to be on a long string of just like right on time, starting for our 1st and 15. Been a really good thing. Been really, really proud of that and look forward to getting back to that because that's what you do. You get back on the horse again after you fall off. We had a little bit of a away from work challenge today that we had to deal with, but nonetheless, we're back rolling again here. And, of course, video across all platforms at 10 a.m. We always hit it right on the number there. Podcasts, wherever you find them, radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Just really, really glad to have you as a part of the program. And, of course, there is one thing that's always true. Especially if you have young kids, you're kind of aware of this, or when you used to be a young kid, you remember this. When you get to Georgia, Florida weekend, you know you've kind of also arrived at Halloween. Sometimes this game's on Halloween. Sometimes for those of you, do you remember the old Jacksonville Landing when you would have the party like the night before the Georgia, Florida game? Sometimes it would also be like a Halloween party, and it would be all these people dressed in costumes and things like that. There's always been a connection between Georgia and Florida and Halloween. Of course, as we transition here to our friends at Kroger bringing today's show possible, making it possible for you here today, don't forget that Kroger's got you covered for all your Halloween needs there as well. Scary good savings on, the tag-reflected merchandise such as decor, the tree carriers, the pumpkin carving kits, so much more. By the way, we had the big pumpkin carving night at our house the other day. You just get pumpkin stuff all over. It's just a total mess. My kids love that. My wife and I love doing that with them. It's a special part of the Halloween season. If you want to make those great memories with your family too, go to Kroger.com/Halloween for more on that today. That's Kroger.com/Halloween for more on that today. All right, we've got Jeff Sentell coming up. A little bit of a cocktail party update from him already on the scene there. Prior to that, speaking of cocktails, let's go around the doghouse here today, poured by a ready-to-drink cocktail that you know by now is a big part of everything that we do, and especially on weekends like this when the cocktail party takes center stage. For us, that means the Finished Long Drink, and today, Around the Doghouse is poured to you by the Finished Long Drink there as well. So let's talk about the rivalry game here for a moment, and let's talk about something that I really, really like. And let me start by talking about something that I don't really like. So yesterday we played this for you. It was Steve Spurrier talking about how Billy Napier had brought him in to speak to the team. And I don't like Spurrier. I don't think I like Napier. I don't like anybody who wears orange and blue. But there's an element of what Florida is doing there, Napier bringing in Spurrier, that you have to say that just sort of makes some sense. Because ultimately this is what I think Billy Napier probably kind of gets. And, listen, sometimes we look at our rivals and we say they're dumb, but they're not stupid. Napier may be dumb, but he's not stupid. I think when he looks at his relationship to Florida, only having been there now about a season and a half, and when he looks at the intensity of the rivalry that's existed for decades before he got there, I think Billy Napier says, when it comes to knowing how to talk about this rivalry, I may not get it right, but let me make sure I don't get it wrong. And so, therefore, let me bring in Steve Spurrier because as much as it pains some of us to admit, certainly pains me to admit, when Spurrier was head coach at Florida, he obviously had success in this rivalry. Georgia has been working hard to pay the Gators back for that these last years, but Spurrier had some success. And so Billy Napier says, I may know how to talk about the X's and O's, and I may know how to talk about the, hey, not getting too high, too low, whatever else. I may know that stuff, but when it comes to the specific nature of this rivalry and how to have success in it, perhaps I don't know how to talk about that. You'll remember this from yesterday. Spurrier said I was the guy that was invited to do that because Billy Napier says, if you're not careful, you don't strike the right tone for this. You don't strike the right emotional balance for this. I was listening to a radio interview the other day with Matt Wyatt, the former Mississippi State quarterback, and Wyatt was from the state of Alabama, and what he said was, coming from Alabama to Mississippi State, and Starkville's just across the Alabama border, it's not too far away, but coming to Starkville from the state of Alabama, that he didn't really know the Egg Bowl as much as some of the other guys on that team did who were from Mississippi. But the one thing Wyatt said he noticed was, hey, the week of that game, they were different at practice. They had a level of focus that was different. And everybody understands that about rivalry games. We talked to Terrence Edwards about this yesterday. Of course, you recognize the difference in practice before you play a game like this. And if you're a coach, you want to be really careful not to mess that up. Don't make too much out of it, but don't undersell what this game means to your most important fans, your most important boosters, and some of the players there on your roster. I want to give you an example of this. Do you remember before Georgia played Auburn? Remember Hugh Freeze? Freeze has been around the SEC, and one of the things you conceivably hire him for at Auburn, you sort of endure some embarrassment because of some of Freeze's past actions. You endure that because, well, at least this guy knows his way around the SEC. But we found out pretty quick that when it comes to talking about a big rivalry game, in this case the Deep South's oldest rivalry between Georgia and Auburn, Hugh Freeze really kind of didn't know how to talk about it. It was a kind of a pretty big blunder there early in the week that I don't know if it cost him the game against Georgia, but it certainly cost him a little bit of a bond with his fans. You got to imagine this. This was awkward. It was weird. Let's go back and hear this Hugh Freeze prior to Georgia playing Auburn this year, seemingly very little understanding of what the Georgia-Auburn rivalry, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, was all about. This is Freeze back in September.
I mean, I don't want to quote something that's inaccurate, but it's the oldest rivalry in the South for sure. I don't know about nationally, but it's. Am I saying that correctly? I don't sense that it has. I better not. I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I'm new here. But I don't sense the hatred that is in some other rivalries that I've been a part of. But nonetheless, I think it's intense. Okay, well, I'll find out. I'm not big on hate. I'm really not. I'm big on just, man, this means something to so many people, so we should compete in a way out of love for our people, not necessarily for hate for other people. That's kind of the way I operate. But, man, I hope we compete because we love Auburn, and it means something to the Auburn people to compete against Georgia. So that'll be my approach, but nonetheless, that love is a great motivator for me.
How awkward is that? Like, that's like cringy awkward. And listen, I kind of get what he's saying there at the end. I try not to hate people either, but I've got no problem hating a thing. Florida football is a thing. I've got no problem hating a thing like Florida football. That's what rivalry is all about. It's just sort of fun. It's fun to have a degree of sports hate for something. But the other part of that where he's like, I don't sense there's the same level of hate here for this one. And he's like, actually, Coach, there is. Like, he has to be corrected off the, kind of off mic, off camera with that. The whole thing is just like super cringy and super awkward. And Hugh Freeze is having to play the I'm new here. Like, that's never a thing you want someone making millions of dollars to have to say, hey, I'm still sort of feeling my way around here, still trying to figure out where the, where the bathrooms are. Like, that's a weird thing for a coach like that to have to say. A very awkward moment trying to talk about this rivalry. And apparently Billy Napier wanted to avoid that this week, so therefore you bring in Steve Spurrier, let him speak to the team. And not a terrible idea, I guess. If you're afraid that you can't get it right, then make sure you don't get it wrong. Bring in a guy like Spurrier, talk about his history here in this rivalry. But this is where it brings us to Georgia. And this is the thing that I just think if you're a Georgia fan, you're very happy about. Even though Kirby Smart, when he's speaking about stuff publicly, is very careful to say, hey, Georgia's got a lot of rivalries. Everything's a rivalry in the SEC. There's a certain way in which you sort of speak about this when you're kind of asked the sort of direct questions. Coaches kind of know how to make sure they don't make anything more than it needs to be. But there are also those moments in which your real feelings are revealed. And we've seen plenty of that from Smart on the sidelines throughout the years, including, by the way, in this series there as well. Many of you know what I'm talking about. That there is an aspect of this game that obviously means more to a Georgia alumnus. And obviously Georgia fans have had fun with having one of their own as head coach. Just little stuff, right? I mean, let's go back to SEC Media Days. What is it? A year ago, 2 years ago? I forget exactly when this was, but it was SEC Media Days. Kirby's asked a question by a reporter about keeping the game in Jacksonville, something we've obviously talked plenty about. But the reporter said something about the Florida-Georgia game. And this rivalry, one of the little things in this rivalry is the idea, because it's not a home and home. See, when something's a home and home, the home team's always second. When you see it listed, it's always second. But because this game is in a neutral site, it's kind of however you want to say it. And so therefore, Georgia fans have always taken pride in mentioning their team, their school first here. And when this popped up at SEC Media Days, Kirby Smart was more than happy to offer the correction. This is a little thing, but it's an example of, not like Hugh Freeze not knowing how to speak about a rivalry, or someone like Billy Napier, perhaps because he's from the outside, not being well-versed to just sort of be off the cuff about this. Kirby Smart clearly, deeply within his soul, knows what this is all about. So after a reporter mentioned something about the Florida-Georgia game, as it was called, this is what Kirby said in response to that.
Well, first off, you misspoke about the game. It's the Georgia-Florida game. Okay, so I want to clear that up.
Simple, to the point, not a huge deal, but little stuff matters, especially in the SEC, right? I mean, little things matter in the SEC, because what's the story of a rivalry? It's 1,000 little things added together. It's they did this to us, so we did this to them, and this is why I don't like them, and this is why they don't like us. It's all a bunch of little stuff. And if you deconstruct any of it, none of it matters probably all that much. But when you add it all together, it creates an atmosphere. And atmospheres create feelings. And the feelings we have for a game like this, they're just different. And Kirby Smart understands that. And I believe it's one of the things that has fueled him to so much success here in this rivalry. And I believe it could play a big role in fueling him to even more success there tomorrow. And I, for one, am very happy to be there to see it. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by the Finnish Long Drink. And simply put, on a cocktail party weekend, the best ready-to-drink cocktail, mixed drink right there in a can. It's exactly what you ought to have in your cooler as you're heading towards the stadium there tomorrow. And maybe it's a great time to try that peach-flavored version of the Finnish Long Drink there as well. Show those folks the Peach State has invaded Jacksonville with some peach-flavored version of the Finnish Long Drink. Or perhaps it's the Long Drink Cranberry or the Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. On a day like tomorrow, I know many of you are ready to do that. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. Long Drink Traditional, Blue Can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. That's actually probably still my favorite, even after all these years. So y'all find it online, thelongdrink.com. You can put in your zip code. And perhaps if you're driving through South Georgia tomorrow, Brunswick, somewhere like that, or heading into Florida, if you want to figure out where you can pick some up, the Long Drink website, thelongdrink.com, will tell you everything you need to know about all of that. The Finnish Long Drink pouring around the doghouse for us here today. Okay, so before we are done, there is a whole nother big crop of games outside of Georgia, Florida, taking place here this weekend. We'll preview some of that for you. But for now, to get a sight and a sound of what's going on the ground there in Jacksonville, and also a little bit on UGA recruiting there as well, let's do all of that with Jeff Sentell here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Jeff sort of represents the DawgNation Scout Party, already on the scene there in Jacksonville, Florida's First Coast. Last night with our friends at the Jacksonville Bulldog Club. I'll see them tomorrow. Jeff saw them last night. That's always one of my favorite parts of this, too. Just one of the great organizations supporting UGA football, our friends with the Jacksonville Bulldog Club. That's always a great time. Jeff was also kind of nosing around RV City a little bit there last night there as well. So, Jeff, give us an idea how it's been going, what you've been enjoying, and how many Georgia fans, or as Larry Munson once called them, all these dog people down there for 4 and 5 days in these condominiums. What has it been like here thus far?
Hey, Brandon. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's been amazing. I mean, this is what you come down to Jacksonville. It used to be called Actionville, I guess, to some, but this is a place where you just never forget. And you just walk through, you just experience it. And it's so many, like, moments that strung together where, like, first of all, here's a unscripted brag on BA segment. I asked my friend who knows Coastal Georgia about as well as I'm supposed to know the Georgia recruiting board. I asked him for a lunch spot yesterday, and he absolutely over-delivered.
Nice.
Beautiful, pristine. You know, Brandon's got a little bit of, KG Wiley veteran travel scribe in him if he ever wanted to get that way around Amelia, Fernandina, anywhere around Brunswick, St. Simon, Sea Island. Brandon's got a pretty good Rolodex and stuff like that. But
I have spent a good bit of time in that area. Yes, I have, sir.
Yeah, Brandon, if we could ever figure out a way to do the podcast every day from Amelia, that would be a great life for you. But I'm walking around Amelia, and, like, somebody comes up to me really randomly and proposes marriage. And this is like, my wife's with me. Like, she's like, oh, this is fun. Like, it was a bachelorette weekend, and that was part of their scavenger hunts for you. I mean, and you just sit there and you go, yeah, I've been in this area for about an hour now, and it's just what Georgia Florida Week is all about. We're checking into a hotel, and they're hurriedly, Brandon, trying to make their lobbies and atriums look like the Super Bowl's happening this weekend with orange and blue and red and black. And they're trying to put up these streamers in front of the check-in desks. And they're like, one of the associates notices, well, we don't have one for Florida. And this lady that was checking in with us, she goes, oh, you don't need one of those for them. That's all right. You don't need them. I mean, it's just kind of what it is, man. This week, it is a Georgia-Florida week. I was driving by RB City, coming out of the Jacksonville Bulldog Club. Excuse me, the Georgia Bulldog Club of Jacksonville. I got to get that right. And Snoop Dogg is blaring inside the meeting on the Thursday night meeting before the game. The Bulldog Club of Jacksonville. There's a guy that comes up advertising. Got to come by and try my. It's some variant of a hunch punch type thing, and he'll knock you on your socks or knock you out of your socks. But there are people in, like, red and black pants already. They're raffling off everything under the sun. I mean, these folks in Jacksonville and everybody that has that pushback about home and home, when they have that little narrative and they have that great, pinpoint PowerPoint presentation, I'm just like, man, you just got to go to Jacksonville more. You just got to experience that game for what it is a little bit more, so you can truly make that statement with some confidence.
So this is a weird comparison, but I want you to see if you understand what I'm about to say here. When I go to this game, there's a sense that I've kind of, like, traveled back in time to an era before I was kind of old enough to appreciate Georgia football. Like, I grew up hearing all the great stories about what this was like, back in the heyday of Vince Dooley and Larry Munson with Herschel Walker and the dominance that Georgia enjoyed. And honestly, when I was starting to go to this game, for the most part, it was Florida wins. And so I was always, like, really, envious, jealous of that era before mine, in which, Georgia fans seemingly had gone down there and had so much fun and obviously had sort of dominated and controlled the series. And so now that we're kind of back in an era again in which Georgia has thankfully been on top here, when I'm there and I'm seeing the people having a good time, and it kind of takes me back to a time that's actually not. It's not something I'm not nostalgic for because I don't have any living memory of it. But it kind of takes me back to the stories that I heard growing up, and I sort of feel like, well, okay, I'm sort of living through this here right now. It's sort of the same reason why, like, this year I want Georgia to make the college football playoff no matter what, but I really want them to play in the Sugar Bowl. That's one of the national semifinal games, because while I've been lucky enough to go to the Sugar Bowl a couple of times when Georgia's played there, and it's a great experience, to be there for a college football playoff kind of also takes me back to that era of hearing the great stories of, oh, yeah, we were down there on Bourbon Street after beating Notre Dame, and this happened and that happened, and you're not old enough to have experienced that, but you would have loved to have been able to travel back in time and to go see it. I'm hoping to have that experience later on this year, but every time I get a chance to do this game, especially in this era in which Georgia thankfully is winning all of these games, it just kind of takes me to that era of the stories that I heard growing up and now getting a chance to sort of replicate with our own generation here right now.
So this is one of the points I made, Brandon, for the Bulldog Club last night. And I think one of my duties as a scribe, as a reporter, is to provide perspective. And this is one of those games where, I can tell really quickly if you're a big-time Dog fan when we start talking Georgia, Florida. If I can throw out scores, and scores in this game mean something. They're ingrained into our memories. If I throw out 26-21, you better remember that, or maybe you might have to give up that beautiful polo you're wearing right now that probably costs more than 3 tanks of gas to get down to Jacksonville with. You realize 37-17. You realize 24-3. You realize recently 42-7. I mean, this is a game where, and it's really funny. You mentioned the 90s, Brandon. Georgia won from 1990 to 2003. They won one game in Jacksonville. One. That could be somebody's whole entire childhood from like age 5 to going off to college at Georgia.
It almost was. It was certainly most of my formative years. I can promise you that.
Yeah, that's probably why the lousy stinking, you kind of twist that knife every time. Because
I'd be lying if I said it didn't have something to do with it. I would. Now, that's my, I guess, 8th grade year through married. That's 8th grade through married for me. That's what I lived with from 8th grade through being married.
Brandon, this rivalry to me over the last 2 or 3 years, it wasn't those FTMF memes that you saw, which add some spice to the rivalry. But Florida fans started coming up to me, and even they're like trying to play that card of sane, rational, not rabid Gator fan or whatever. They weren't wearing jorts. They didn't have a mullet. They looked like, they were a responsible member of society. And they're like, how much longer do you think Kirby's going to have there at Georgia? Do you think he's going to go off to the NFL? So, when they realize the other side's got the Death Star, except this one doesn't have the thermal exhaust port, they're like, we're in trouble. So is he going to move on like Steve did eventually? And you just watch the people in this game. Like, Brandon, there's so many people that have stories. There's so many people that go back and forth. And, how it's really turned. And perspective is really big, Brandon, because, I went through this recently. The best run for Dooley's teams in the 80s was 24 out of 25.
Yeah.
The best run for Saban's Alabama, and you got a couple of really strong stretches, but the biggest number they ever put up was 36 out of 37. Georgia is now 40 out of 41, and if that doesn't hit home, if you want to call this the glory era, these are the new glory years, or if you want to call it the new golden era. A lot of people have different names for it, and it's always fun to hear the different names they have. But to see this Georgia team, and doesn't have to click on all cylinders to win this weekend, just has to play good football. I think they will rotate like a merry-go-round. This might be the Ra Thomas game. It might be the Ladd McConkey game, or it might be the Dominic Lovett or Oscar Delp game, and maybe Dejon is next week. Maybe Kendall is this week. They don't have to look to any one guy to win these games. It's just like, okay, whatever the matchups dictate, we're going to feed that guy. It's just Georgia could not have been in a better spot and a bigger spot. And I think as long as Kirby's around, that from 1990 to 2003 for them is going to look like 2016 to maybe 2030 or 2033, where they only get 1 or 2 on their side.
Yeah, in the time we have left, let's transition and I guess do what we're supposed to do, which is talk a little bit of recruiting here for a moment. And obviously Georgia, Florida, relevant because what happened last week. L.J. McCray chose Florida. We didn't expect him to choose Georgia, but I probably expected him to choose Florida State, and ultimately Florida was the choice there for McCray. What do you think that the kind of rise of Florida has a little bit of recruiting power here? We're seeing obviously right now Billy Napier's recruiting at a level much higher than anything either of the last handful of Florida coaches have recruited at. Kind of getting this team back to sort of a top 3 type level. McCray's a big win. Swooping in to not just money whip, but a team like Florida State that also thought it was going to be able to do the same thing perhaps. And ultimately it's Florida who kind of swoops in and wins this battle. What is the rise of Florida as a recruiting power again, what does that mean for Georgia's overall recruiting efforts? Because the McCray thing's kind of interesting because these are the sort of things that we think about a Jalen Carter, certainly, but even like a Warren Brinson, coming into Florida to get defensive linemen, that's something that Georgia's been doing as of late. And perhaps with all three of the major powers in Florida State, Florida, Miami, all kind of spending big on NIL, is the Sunshine State going to be a little less friendly for Georgia moving forward now?
I don't think so. Remember how Georgia's done the last few years, getting 6 out of the top 10 players in Florida. You mentioned L.J. McCray. I'll give you some quick player parallel association. I think he's going to be a Gervon Dexter type player. And we remember when Dexter went away to Georgia, wanted him really bad. Georgia had a sniff at him. He eventually chose the Gators. And when he went to Florida, everybody was like, wow, he's going to be great. He's going to make them a little bit better. But I think you need about 7 to 9 more Gervon Dexter types. Dexter's in the NFL now. He had a decent career at Florida. Never really, saw the potential of what he thought he could do in Florida. And I'll guess I'll just cut straight to the heart here. Number 3 in the country, Brandon. I really think that recruiting class is not quite fool's gold or eye candy, but it's at the point of it. And my point here is simple. They have one offensive lineman that's ranked among the top 10 in the country in this class, Brandon, and that's Fletcher Westphal, a guy that I believe could have been a Bulldog if Georgia wanted him to be a part of their 6-man offensive line class. And you sit there and look at it, they're getting a lot of things right with skill guys at Florida, but they currently, this class, Brandon, I looked at it recently, they have the number 125 overall offensive tackle. And then their next best offensive lineman is a 3-star. You're not going to win in the SEC when you're not devoting those resources to the trenches on both sides of the ball the way you're going to have to do to compete against Georgia. I think Florida will line up tomorrow, and they will give the Dogs a game. But ultimately, I think you will see one football team that's just much more physical, much more a man-handling type team, and the other side is the blue and orange side is more of a finesse type team.
You wrote about this the other day. It was a little bit eye-opening for some Georgia fans to see Ellis Robinson, who I think right now he's certainly among the prized recruits for Georgia's 2024 class, but he was also on hand for Miami in its win against Clemson on Saturday. But it sounds like you don't think Georgia fans have anything to worry about as it relates to Robinson here right now?
Do not. Robinson has been a dog lock for some time. He's been a Georgia Bulldog lock since, he made his commitment back in February. The only other school he talks to is Miami, and then he was silently committed before that. We were able to share a really strong story. Brendan, I think it's probably one of the most powerful I've ever documented for my time here at DawgNation dating back to 2015. And I simply asked the mother of Ellis Robinson, why Georgia? What do you like best about Georgia? And first of all, she wanted you to understand her son. She called Ellis a mama's boy, said he really has feelings. He's a really sensitive young man. He's really passionate and emotional about things he cares about in life. But then she shared a story, Brandon, while Ellis had meniscus surgery that kind of cost him 4 games of his junior year. And when the family was in the car on the way for that procedure, the Georgia staff, including Director of Recruiting Administration, Christina Harris, got on the phone. They wished the family well. They led the family in prayer on the way to that procedure. And Brandon, this was in the middle of 2023 when other schools were clamoring and trying to rally to finish out their classes for 2023. Georgia was making the number one cornerback in the country by far. They were having genuine emotional connection with him and his family, so much to the fact that when Nicole Robinson hung up that phone, she's like, that's it. It's done. That Georgia sealed the deal for me because of the way they cared for her son, not just as a as a vessel for locking down future Florida receivers, just because of that connection that they'd made, the way they'd recruited him like nobody else. And that stuff sticks with him is now, Brandon. Miami keeps coming, and the term money whip, I think that's appropriate. Millions of dollars in NIL is what Ellis Robinson could get if he was about that. But he just loves everything about Georgia. They love the people in the building. They love talking to Kirby Smart. And that's one of those stories. We've written those a lot, Brandon. But when you get the Dog staff on the phone with a player, a junior player at that, who's on the way to a procedure, when some of the other schools that were recruiting him as vastly talented as Ellis Robinson is, they'd kind of forgotten about him. They didn't see him playing. They weren't even aware of the procedure. And you've got Georgia making the connection that they did on the way to surgery. It's just amazing how this staff always gets it right. And you're talking about Ellis Robinson, Brandon. I'm the guy that, I want people to keep the receipts. I think Ellis will be the most talented, skilled corner that Kirby Smart has ever signed at Georgia. And I'm saying that with a lot of respect to Eric Stokes, Kamari Lassiter, Keely Ringo, Tyson Campbell, even A.J. Harris, the freshman in this class. As far as skills to play the position, as far as length, I think not only he's the number one cornerback in the country, but this is a guy that would have been the number one cornerback in the country maybe at least the last 3 or 4 years back.
Let me just squeeze in one tiny thing before we let you go here. This is kind of away from Georgia, but I'm curious about, just kind of the recruiting landscape in general. I thought Ryan Wingo going to Texas this week was kind of interesting, the 5-star wide receiver. It seems like he was heading towards Missouri. It seems like that was another one of those examples of Missouri kind of leveraging some of its NIL stuff to bring in kind of an elite-level recruit the same way we saw them do with Williams-Nwaneri a month or so ago. How much of the Wingo kind of, oh, look at that, he's picked Texas, maybe a little bit like McCray picking Florida, how much like big surprise stuff do you think we could see down the stretch, whether it be Georgia, but perhaps maybe just sort of these other teams? Like, are we going to see these sort of last-minute swerves now start to happen a little bit more on a regular basis? I mean, do you kind of see, some of that happening, like a Jeremiah Smith comes to mind, or somebody like that, where you could sort of see something crazy kind of happen here at the end. How much fireworks do you think around UGA with the other major recruiting powers could we see as we head towards this early signing period?
Yeah, I guess I want fans to look at that through the filter of kind of the way Braves fans have been educated through certain payroll caps to look at it. And what I mean by that is towards later in the season, you're going to have teams understanding where guys may be portaling or where guys may be going pro, and they realize, hey, we need another remarkable asset right there. My big takeaway from the Wingo decision is to me, it's a crack in what Eli Drinkwitz is trying to build at Missouri, because look at it. They've got this sporty record right now. They're 7-1. They're angling for an SEC, first place SEC East showdown in Athens next week. And they've got Luther Burden as a model to say, hey, come here, get featured, play a lot, get yourself some NIL, get your face on the bag of potato chips like Luther Burden got. And for him to choose Texas, I think that was a big kind of a statement that he made. You want to call it a vote of no confidence, or maybe a vote of more confidence in Steve Sarkisian in Texas. I think that's what it feels like to me. I think you're going to see more schools figure out, hey, we're going to need a guy here because this guy's leaving, or this guy's going to go pro, and we need to come back in and fill with another talent there. I think that's mostly what you'll see. Not a lot of high-end, Brandon. I think it's fascinating to look at basically the top 35 players in the country, and I think only 1 or 2 right now are even uncommitted, and we've never seen that before. But that's the NIL era. This is the age where everybody tries to get everybody committed over the summer. And that's kind of what the long-term future is going to look like. It might not be as much of those late fireworks. I think Georgia will try to flip 3 or 4 guys. They'll have a lot of success in doing so that are on their board. But a lot of those big guys, some of these papers are already kind of signed and sealed, and agreements and handshakes have been done for a while.
All right, Jeff, great stuff. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy your time. I look forward to seeing you there tomorrow, and we'll do what we've done many times in the past. We'll watch Georgia, Florida right there in Jacksonville, and hopefully see the Dogs get another win against those lousy, stinking Gators, and then we'll get ready to do it 364 days later. Jeff, really good stuff. Thanks for your time.
Hey, man, can't wait to hear that Gator Hater countdown get a little fatter over the weekend, man.
Love it, Jeff. We'll talk to you then.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really, really, really good stuff. You get the taste of what it's kind of already like down there on the First Coast and around those, as Larry Munson said, those St. Simons and Jekyll Island, all these places where these dog people have these condominiums for 4 and 5 days. I just love it. I just do. And for those of you who are already there and you're perhaps enjoying our show as you are there, maybe on that second cup of coffee, or maybe you're just waking up because of something you did last night, well, hey, whatever. No judging here. Just enjoy yourself, and we will see you at the stadium there on Saturday, as I'll be coming over tomorrow, so can't wait for that. Let's also get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, When you think about, time at the beach and having a good time there, it also makes me think about what else I enjoy, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And, man, we got some great stuff in store in 2024. In fact, think about this. So you're there in Jacksonville, and that means just a little short drive, 95 from there. They get you to Port Canaveral. And in July of 2024, there's a wonderful debut there at Port Canaveral. It's the brand new Oasis-class ship known as Utopia of the Seas. And this is kind of a cool thing. So for a long time, and if you've traveled before, you kind of understand this. Cruised before, you understand this. If you're new to cruising, I'll explain it to you really quickly. For a long time, when Royal Caribbean would introduce like the Oasis-class ship, which has been kind of the largest category of ships for quite some time, those ships were sort of exclusively reserved for like the 7-night sailings. And honestly, I think a 7-night sailing is a really great first cruise opportunity because you can experience kind of the fullness of everything that Royal Caribbean offers. But for some people, especially people with families, a 7-night cruise can be oftentimes not the easiest commitment because so many people have so many things going on, or perhaps it's kind of a cost concerns, whatever else. So a lot of people are saying, it'd be great to take a shorter cruise, a 3 or a 4-night sailing, on one of these big Oasis-class ships. And so this year, Royal Caribbean is kind of rolling that out, the chance to take a 3 and a 4-night sailing, a convenient shorter sailing, perhaps over a long weekend, on Oasis-class ship to sort of get the fullness of everything that Royal Caribbean offers. But in July of 2024, not only will they do 3 and 4-night sailings on a large Oasis-class cruise ship, but they're also going to do it on a brand new cruise ship. This never happened before. It's a really cool thing. And Jessica Slater can tell you more about Utopia of the Seas and its debut there in July. So check out Jessica. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, I want to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We'll kind of do what we do on Friday. Give you big thoughts, final thoughts on the big games of the weekend. Let me start with Georgia and Florida. It's as simple as this for me. We have said that the magic number here is 13. 13 points allowed in each of the next 4 games. That's the recipe for Georgia to staying on the path to go for 3 and 23. And that's quite the response that Georgia can offer with a defense that's probably faced some, criticism and questions more so than we're used to seeing the Georgia defense face. But go out there and allow no more than 13 points in any of the next 4 games. And you're talking about being undefeated through this stretch of rivalry game, ranked opponents, and still well on track for that 3rd straight national championship, or as I said, go for 3 and 23, that being the mission. So if you keep Florida 13 there on Saturday, tomorrow, then it's simply a matter of how many can you score to create the margin of victory that you want. We talked earlier about the confidence, the swagger that Carson Beck possesses here. The idea that he pushes past whatever nervousness and anxiety he has about arguably playing on the biggest stage of his season here to this point in time. I think Carson Beck can find his way to 30 for Georgia. In fact, that's our score for Saturday. We got Georgia winning against Florida 30-13. And if you care, that obviously covers the point spread for the Dogs there as well. But we'll take Georgia 30-13 here in this spot on Saturday. Another SEC game of note, it features a future Georgia opponent taking on a team that Georgia's already beaten. That's Kentucky hosting Tennessee, with the Vols seeing themselves as a 3.5-point road underdog. Tennessee has not been good on the road against SEC teams as of late, just 1-4 against the spread in their last 5 conference road games. So this is not an easy spot for Tennessee necessarily, although they did beat Kentucky last year 44-6 in a game played in Knoxville. But ultimately, I think the vibes for these two teams are pretty different. I mean, you can look at Tennessee's game against Alabama and think, oh gosh, what could that have been? Obviously, Tennessee had the first half lead. But ultimately, this is a Tennessee team that even if it can't win the division, still thinks it's playing for something. Or if it's not going to win the division, maybe it's better said, still thinks it's playing for something. I think it's still kind of playing to preserve the remnants of positive momentum that Tennessee thought it had last year. And it beat Alabama a year ago, had a chance to beat them for a second straight year. They feel like they've done something here. And so I think against Kentucky on Saturday, I sort of feel like they think they've got something to play for. On the flip side of this, I don't love the vibes around Kentucky. And in fact, their really impressive win against Florida a few weeks ago, doesn't that seem like a total outlier on what the rest of the Kentucky season has sort of been? kind of does to me anyway, including two Saturdays ago against Missouri there as well. This just, or actually last Saturday, this just sort of feels like a Kentucky team that's either heading in a bad direction or just sort of filled with a lot of sideways energy right now and really kind of going nowhere fast. And so from that standpoint, I think the vibe here is on the side of Tennessee, and I do expect Tennessee to cover the spread on the road on Saturday, just simply because I think there's something going on at Tennessee right now that's perhaps more positive than whatever might be going on at Kentucky, where Mark Stoops sort of feuded with some of his fans over NIL, had kind of an awkward moment on a radio show, openly has feuded over the course of the last year with his basketball coach, John Calipari. Seems like Mitch Barnhart, the athletic director, sort of mixed up in some of that. And comparatively speaking, I think that Tennessee has just much better vibes all around. As I told you yesterday, too, I don't expect this to happen, but I'd have my eye on it a little bit. Do we eventually see some, or maybe perhaps slightly more of Nico Iamaleava, the freshman quarterback there, as a way of maybe also providing a little bit of an offensive spark if Tennessee needs that? I would at least check the pulse on that a little bit, because obviously that'll be relevant for what Tennessee might look like when they take on Georgia coming up in a couple of weeks. The rest of the SEC slate, not particularly great, not particularly interesting, I don't think. So we'll step outside and go to top 25 action here. Texas hosts BYU. Longhorns this week have been about a 17.5-point favorite. They'll obviously play this game without Quinn Ewers. Much the same way you say watch out for Nico Iamaleava, you might also watch out for a little bit of Arch Manning. There's a chance he could play on Saturday. Obviously, he won't start. Malik Murphy is the starting quarterback there, and this is a guy who had a lot of buzz around him going back to spring practice. Texas has been a preseason playoff pick for me. Obviously, they're trying to maintain that status after losing to Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago. But the truth is, even though they scuffled last week against Houston, this is something I expect Texas to do. I think they want to make that Big 12 title game matter. They obviously just won the Ryan Wingo recruitment, so people are feeling good in Austin here right now. And this is a BYU team that earlier, this year got completely blown out by TCU. What was the final score? They lost 44-11 to a TCU team that's not very good. The new Big 12 teams are all struggling here against what we kind of think of as the heritage Big 12 teams. Obviously, Texas is on its way out, but they're still in the league for right now. I think it's a showcase game for Malik Murphy. Maybe a little light dusting of Arch Manning on the situation there too, but whatever it is, it's enough to get Texas to the pay window against the Cougars. I believe they'll cover the 17.5, even with a backup quarterback. However, I've got the road team when it comes to the other game in the Pac-12 worth noting. Oregon traveling to Utah. Utah fresh off its win last week against USC, but that to me says more about the Trojans and the kind of listless, lifeless, frankly weak and soft team the Trojans are here right now. Utah is physically tough, but it's an Oregon team that's also tough both mentally and physically. And frankly, I think Oregon, even in losing to Washington, gives itself the look of being one of the upper echelon teams in college football. Also, Dan Lanning has not had trouble on the road. Rice-Eccles Stadium is typically thought to be among the toughest home field advantages in all the country for whoever goes there. But the fact is, when it comes to playing Pac-12 teams on the road, in 6 previous games as head coach, Dan Lanning 4-2 against the spread versus Pac-12 teams away from Eugene, Oregon. So from that standpoint, favored in Salt Lake City against a Kyle Whittingham team, not always an easy spot to be in. But I just believe the Oregon's the better team. I believe they cover the number. And when they do, let that be a little bit of a reminder to you there as well. We didn't make too big of a deal about this on the show, but earlier this week, Urban Meyer, taking care of one of his former assistants, called Kyle Whittingham the best coach in college football. So if you want a little rooting interest here already, you probably root for Dan Lanning because you like him, but maybe root against Utah on Saturday just for the sheer ridiculousness. I mean, take Kirby Smart out of it for a moment. I mean, Smart is in our minds the best coach in college football. But to tout Whittingham even over Nick Saban seems pretty weird there too. So we would rank Kirby Smart as the best coach, but to say Whittingham is the best coach and not mention Kirby or Saban, in this case Kirby probably more relevant for this audience, kind of a silly thing for Urban Meyer to do, and pretty clearly a guy who's trying to take care of one of his own and perhaps protect his own legacy there too, knowing that he's pretty quickly being trampled by the likes of a Kirby Smart here, who's emerging as much as he is here right now. So when and if Utah loses on Saturday, just keep in mind it also proves Urban Meyer wrong, which in the eyes of Georgia fans is never a bad thing to do. I'll take Louisville -4 against Duke. The Riley Leonard status here. A good quarterback, but probably still banged up. And if that be the case, Duke's not going on the road and beating a Louisville team right now that I think has the look of being a pretty good football team here. I really do. What Brahms doing there in his kind of return home after establishing himself as a great play-calling style head coach at Purdue. I think Louisville's a pretty good football team right now. Good enough to beat Duke on Saturday. And then I'll take the underdog, Wisconsin, 14.5-point underdogs against Ohio State. There is something about this Ohio State offense that's just not quite right. Good resume. They've won at Notre Dame. They beat Penn State last week. But offensively, other than Marvin Harrison Jr., just something's kind of missing here right now. Kyle McCord is not a very effective follow-up to what C.J. Stroud was before that. And that may be enough for Wisconsin to keep it closer than experts think on Saturday. We'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and a look at some of the weekend's big games. And, of course, we'll be following those all week long. Now, speaking of fun things coming up, obviously a lot of football action coming up. But in addition to that, if you're in the Cartersville, Bartow County area, some really fun things coming up there as well that you want to keep in mind here for this upcoming weekend too, including Westfest at the Booth Museum. It's October 26th through the 28th. It's a great Western experience, reenacting the gunfight of the OK Corral. You got some live music, some Native American dancing, and some delicious food trucks going on with that. Also, how about the Evolution of Bigfoot Expedition? Not expedition. That's a different thing. This is an exhibition. An expedition is a journey. An exhibition is a great showcase of things, and that's what this Evolution of Bigfoot is going to be. It's going on right now at the Savoy Auto Museum. That's always a lot of fun. Bigfoot monster trucks and all those really cool things. You can see all that there at the Savoy Auto Museum, which is a beautiful facility. I see that a lot as I'm driving to high school football. Wonderful place. And then, of course, you got the big-time pub crawl coming with Halloween in mind here around Cartersville is there as well. That's October 27th to 28th. It's just $45, and you can get a beverage at 10 participating locations. So some really fun stuff there on that. That's coming up there as well. That's this weekend. The other stuff may have already been over with. But anyway, that's coming up this weekend. So make sure you check that out. The website to go to here is onlyincartersvillebartow.com. That's onlyincartersvillebartow.com for more on that. And good vibes to go out into the cocktail party weekend. Let's give you some, as you would imagine, lousy, stinking Gator-themed golden shoes. We'll roll through a few of these, starting with Waylon Wilson. I always like these Spirit Halloween costumes. He says, here's a Spirit Halloween costume for the Gator fan. Items include trash can with the lousy, stinking Gator logo. The idea that this is our year with delusional fans. Stats from 2008. SEC, baby. Head coach optional. Very funny stuff from Waylon Wilson there, kind of the play on the Spirit Halloween meme that we've seen a lot here over the course of the last couple of years. Good stuff from Waylon. He's become a very prolific golden shoe winner. Speaking of prolific winners, about Ryan Walker there as well. Just a few memories, he says, to go along with hunting those lousy, stinking Gators. Fried gator tail and nuggets with hot sauce, light bread with collards, mac and cheese, some sweet tea, and some peach cobbler with some vanilla ice cream on deck. You love that from Ryan Walker, and you see the beautiful graphic here with the Hart Bridge and the stadium in the background, Kirby choking out the Gator. You see Noshawn Marino going over the pile, Larry Munson making the great call, Harry Dog holding up the Gator hunting season. Lindsey Scott, how about Lindsey Scott running on the Hart Bridge there? That is an amazing thing. Ryan Walker, very, very talented guy, and a well-deserved golden shoe for him with all the Gators kind of hanging there in the background. That's a pretty good scene right there for Ryan Walker, and a great montage of moments for Georgia in this rivalry. Boy, you really, really love that. And then finally, we'll give you Mad Dog, who you knew would be heard from there as well. He says it's time to get serious about wrestling those lousy, stinking Gators into submission. And you see Kirby Smart doing that, sitting on the Gator there, got those hands clamped around the mouth. Total alpha move there, owning that Gator, and we expect the same thing to happen there tomorrow. Mad Dog, great to hear from you. We'll give you a golden shoe for that there as well. And to all of you, this is what the countdown has been all about, getting down to this moment. We are just one day away. We will see you in Jacksonville. If you can't be there with us in person, join us for the DawgNation postgame show from the field after the game, and we will hopefully bask in the glow and the glory of another victory against Florida tomorrow. Can't wait to see you there for it. We'll also see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Enjoy the game, everybody, and don't forget to be a Gator hater all weekend long. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cool down. R.S. Andrews, the one to turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to go off my phone here for a little bit for these comments. And I told our folks at DawgNation.com that I would show up and do comments with them first, just from the simple standpoint that I was a little messed up on our 1st and 15 today. We've been really good on the 1st and 15s for a long time. Not quite as good today, so that means we need to take care of these folks here right now. So we'll get ready to do that. Let's see if we can do this here. Get in here and be ready to go. And we'll get some comments over here at DawgNation.com. DT says that Heather Dennett, she calls her something else, has Georgia between 6 and 8 sometime in the first college football playoff ranking. Well, I'm sure if that be the case, then she'll be a very happy lady if that's the case. But we'll see. We'll see. Scott Harris on the idea that Shane Beamer's involved in the Spygate. So we said yesterday that the next twist on this would likely be someone else benefiting from the Michigan information. Is that what's out there right now? I hadn't heard that. If that is, I guess I don't have anything on that here right now. Lowe also mentioning the idea that Carson Beck was in the Heisman discussion on ESPN. Yeah, so we're going to try to sit out some of that just because we kind of shut off our mouths about Brock Bowers, and obviously, based on the injury, that hasn't turned out so well. But the one thing I can tell you, just objectively speaking, is if you have the ability to go back and kind of track this, the odds on Beck have been plummeting, meaning he's gone from a huge long shot to a much shorter shot here over the course of the last couple of weeks. So it's not impossible. Right now, the Heisman Trophy's up for grabs. It just is. And so while we're not going to do the, like the whole crazy hype campaign as we've kind of done in the past, we're just going to kind of sit that out here for a minute just because we want to try to, keep the vibes where they are. Objectively speaking, someone's going to win the Heisman Trophy, and right now we don't know who it is. Prior to last week's game, Michael Penix seemed like a pretty overwhelming favorite, but Penix's number, his odds at Washington have kind of changed a little bit over the course of the last week. He's probably still maybe the most likely winner. J.J. McCarthy's kind of emerged here, the Michigan quarterback here too. But I'm not being funny here. Given the cloud over Michigan, I'm not really quite so sure. A lot of old school-minded voters, there's a lot of people that get Heisman votes. Not all of them are, moved by objective analysis. It could be a bad vibe around the Michigan program that kind of talks some people out of voting for McCarthy. Penix could be, perhaps dropping in the minds of some here right now. Caleb Williams, I believe, is done, just simply from the standpoint that USC is not a relevant football team. Someone's going to win it, and it could be Carson Beck. It just could, but obviously that requires a high level of play over the course of the next few weeks. Lowe says that Tennessee fans losing to Carolina has them singing "Somebody's Watching Me," which is funny. I mean, the Tennessee defense was terrible a year ago. The idea that you needed a whole lot of extra help to torch that defense, you just didn't. I mean, if Georgia hadn't decided that it didn't want to get rained on and want to get back to the locker room, it could have scored whatever it wanted to against Tennessee last year. That was a soft football team. And, this year Tennessee's actually a little probably saltier than they were a year ago. Not as good offensively, but they're kind of better in kind of the football areas, the places where it sort of counts. But, the idea that it's just inexplicable that Tennessee team got exposed, given the fact they were essentially playing the same kind of like Big 12 style that Josh Heupel was kind of raised on there at Oklahoma, and that style's not going to work at the SEC to a championship level. So, someone was going to truly exploit that at some point. Alabama essentially did, but to the tune of a losing effort, South Carolina was just the team that got a chance to do it. Ryan Walker says, thanks for showing my golden shoe. He says the Dog's going to win 35-14. Beck's got 305 yards, 3 touchdowns with a rushing touchdown to boot, no interception, and Dejon Edwards, 125 yards, a touchdown. Ra gets a touchdown. Lovett gets 2, and then Arian Smith gets the deep bomb. Boy, I love that, Ryan. And I will tell you, you go back and look at what Kirby said about Arian here this week. This is a guy that's had some drops. We all know that, right? And I think the Georgia fans really want it for Arian because, as Ryan said, that's the guy who really provides your best home run threat, even more so than Ladd McConkey because of the overwhelming speed. Arian Smith really kind of provides that chance to get behind a defense, but you got to catch the ball when it's thrown to you. And obviously, Arian's had some drops, and yet Kirby remained really complimentary of Arian Smith here earlier this week. So I believe there's still a trust factor there, and I believe this is a guy they still want to reward with a chance to make the big catch. He's just got to haul it in, and perhaps he will. I do think the majority of the offense is going to be some of the other guys that he mentioned, the Lovetts, the Rah-Rahs, the Rosemy-Jack Saints. Ladd, that's the focal point, I believe, of the passing attack. But they're not done with Arian Smith yet. I think you're right about that. Joe Garliardi also mentioning Dylan Gabriel, saying he's not better than Carson Beck. I'm proclaiming it as of now, Beck for Heisman. I do think Gabriel's one of those names I didn't mention earlier. You've got to take him seriously as a candidate here. But you're right. I mean, Dylan Gabriel is not so good. I mean, in fact, before the year began, that's a guy who I wondered might eventually lose his job. In fact, the two quarterbacks who I said maybe they need to lose their job, Gabriel in favor of Jackson Arnold and Jaden Daniels in favor of Garrett Nussmeier, both Gabriel and Daniels, ironically, are both kind of in the Heisman conversation here right now. And if Jaden Daniels and LSU beat Alabama next week, then Daniels becomes, I think, one of the real considerations for the award. Let's see what else. So we talked yesterday about the idea that in fact, let me see if I can find this because some of y'all are bringing this up, and then we'll go to the other comment sections here too. So we talked the other day about kind of the next iteration of this possibly being, hey, did Michigan share some of its alleged information with other people? We kind of brought that up. So I guess there's been some chatter about that. I think I may have seen something about this. Let me see if I can find this. So hold on one second. Let me see. So there's a guy named John Bryce who writes for Football Scoop. Let me see if I can pull this up without wasting too much time. I don't know if I'm able to find this quick enough. All right, I may not be able to find this quick enough, but I guess maybe it's John Bryce from Football Scoop who has some of this right now on the idea that that Michigan was not just using information for itself, but using, information to perhaps give to other teams. I don't know. We sort of had a feeling at some point in time that might have come up. I'm going to try one more time to see if I can find what I want to read here. But I mean, as I said before, the idea that Tennessee was somehow this unbeatable team that could not be taken down unless someone had signs, I find that to be pretty ridiculous. All right, so I'm not finding what I'm looking for there, but pretty interesting nonetheless. All right, a couple more here at DawgNation.com. Then we're going to go somewhere else to the other comment sections. Scott Harris says, I'm hoping that Kendall Milton has a big day tomorrow. I'd love to see that. Joe Garliardi says, I have the score 37-17, but I could see the Gators scoring less. They can't run the ball. 37-17 was also the score of the 1997 game, right? So there you go. Perhaps some positive vibes coming if that indeed is the case. Let me go to YouTube here for a moment. We'll get some comments over there. See how folks are kind of seeing all of this playing out. Let me go to YouTube here for a moment. We'll get some comments. All right. Lesko says, I feel like this game is comparable to Kentucky. Beck shows out in his hometown, smothers the Gators to the tune of 56-20. How about that? A lot of points from Lesko there. That's pretty interesting. Memphis Dog says, I'd love to see Arian get some sticky fingers. I think it's coming. Sticky fingers, of course. A famous barbecue sauce coming out of Memphis there, too. So that's kind of cool. Paul Moon says, I went to Jacksonville once for the Georgia-Florida game, the year we beat Florida with David Green. Pope had a good game, if I remember. Yeah, back in 2004. I remember that one. That was the first time I was ever on the sideline for a game. That was really fun. ABC Chiropractic says, as a student 40 years ago was my first time in Jacksonville for the game. Never had been a part of anything like it. Yeah, what an amazing experience it is. If you've been lucky enough to be there, you've seen some really cool stuff. Yeah, Crow King also mentioned the South Carolina thing there as well. I need to read up more on that. Like I said, I was sort of vaguely aware that rumor existed, but not specifically, what it is. I guess I'm a little bit suspicious of it. That seems sort of wishful thinking, I guess, from the standpoint of Tennessee fans. 478 Dog says Utah would be top 4 in the SEC this year. Maybe so, but that's still a team that's pretty limited offensively. I mean, they scored against USC, but prior to that, they're only averaging about 21 points per game. So let's watch them against Oregon on Saturday to see how they would fare against what we think of as sort of an upper-tier SEC team. Because as of right now, they're still yes, they beat Florida, but in my mind, there's still a good number of SEC teams, arguably better than Florida. Bill Coon says, help talk me off this ledge. This Florida team has me nervous. How does one deal with the Jekyll and Hyde? Better go strong early, Dogs, on my way, not driving. Well, listen, be careful nonetheless getting there. And, yeah, I mean, I think you should expect this to be a competitive game, and I think you should expect Georgia to make more plays when it matters. I mentioned 30-13, but that doesn't mean I think that Georgia jumps out to a 17-point lead. You probably have to play most of this game within a score. That means a mistake from you is magnified, and that means that you're trying to build and add to that lead perhaps late, or taking advantage of a Florida mistake to kind of put the game on ice. So I think hopefully Georgia's earned enough credit from us to expect them to make the plays when it matters. But this is a game in which most of the snaps are going to come with the outcome in doubt, I believe. I think that's probably true. Let's get a couple of other comments here. Cassie Turner checks in to say, is our guy Tennessee man still in here? So listen, the one thing you don't want is Cassie getting after if you're a troll, because Cassie will put you in your place pretty quick there. North Georgia Dogs got 38-10, so there you go on that. And by the way, the other thing that seems like it is confirmed, we talked about this the other day, the idea there was no evidence that Michigan had scouted TCU, and does that somehow mean that that it kind of helps explain the victory for TCU there? Well, come to find out, there are pretty strong allegations. If it hadn't been a Friday, we weren't kind of getting ready for Georgia-Florida game, we may have talked more about this in the regular show a moment ago. But supposedly TCU was aware of the sign stealing and therefore putting out dummy signals as a way of tricking Michigan into thinking they knew what was coming, while secretly they were sort of supplying a different type of thing here. And this alone sort of explains why this is A, cheating, and why B, it's the kind of thing you want to get out of the sport. Because ultimately, what you really want is the game to be decided by who has the better players. And that's what you really want, the better players, or perhaps the better coached team. If all this is just a contest to who has the most, willing degree of espionage, that's not football. That's just not football. And so that would explain why you want this out of the game and why this rises to the level of being cheating. So TCU was so aware of and so concerned about Michigan's surveillance tactics, therefore they put out some phony signals, allegedly and reportedly, to make Michigan think it did know what was coming, all the while doing something different. Like, that's not what I want football to be. It's just not. And, I want it to be – and I know it sounds like naive or trite or something, but I want the game to be decided by the coaches and players in the field, not by, the sort of dorks with binoculars up in the stands. That's just kind of what I want the game to be. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Nature Gator says that Napier's got a Gator legend speaking to the team before every game, and it doesn't speak to desperation. Well, let's see him lose badly on Saturday. Let's see how that desperation feels. Cassie also says, how did Michigan not catch on to that? That's just goofy. Yeah, to a certain extent it might be. You may be right about that. Memphis Dog also mentioning Graham Mertz. Yeah, I mean, objectively speaking, is at least as objective as we're capable of being, Mertz has had really kind of an okay year. Now, how much of that is kind of boosted by a good performance against against sorry, I'm trying to pull up the rest of these comments. How much of that is kind of coming against the South Carolina defense that's perhaps not very good? Maybe that's the case. But the numbers still kind of speak for themselves a little bit. Graham Mertz has been okay for Florida this year. I don't think you can expect to just go out there and dominate simply because Graham Mertz is not a effective quarterback. That Mertz, I believe, is at least good enough to mostly keep Florida in this game for the most part. And that may not be quite a compliment, but it's, like Mertz is not so bad that he's going to eliminate any chance Florida has to win this game. Marlon Malcolm says Mertz has been pretty good up to this point, but the Dogs are going to put major pressure on him. Yeah, I mean, kind of came up this week. Florida's taken 19 sacks this year. That's, 10th worst in the SEC? So this is not a Florida offensive line that I think is very good, and that could really become your opportunity to exploit it. But Georgia's got to be more active with its front seven. I mean, honestly, there's been some stuff said about the Georgia front seven coming into this game here a little bit this week. And, of course, after the fact, everybody pretending, this Georgia team made up the idea of bulletin board material or made up the idea of critics. If y'all want to look for it, it's not hard to find people saying, is this Georgia front seven very good? It's not hard to find if you want to find it. If you really want to look for it, that's not that hard to find. So Saturday would be a great day for Georgia to show what it is all about with its front seven, because Florida is the kind of team that you can get to its quarterback. People have here this year. But Georgia does need to play better up front to be able to do that. Now, when Georgia's needed to this year, it's also gotten after quarterbacks pretty well. Think about second half against Spencer Rattler as an example of that. That could be called upon here on Saturday there, too. Marshall Fleming mentioning the idea that the FBI is involved in the Michigan thing. Yeah, I saw that. Admittedly, I don't really know what that's about. And, I mean, the FBI was also involved in the basketball fiasco the entire time, and nothing really came of that. So I did see the one report that the FBI is a part of this, but I don't know exactly, what that is. I mean, typically a federal investigation sort of takes place around, sometimes like interstate type stuff. When you cross over one state line into another, all of a sudden now you've kind of veered in the direction like a federal type offense. But I don't quite know what law would have necessarily been broken. It seems obvious that some rules have been broken. Not quite so sure what law has been broken, but sometimes the FBI seems to do what it wants to do. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says Harbaugh accused TCU of cheating for hiding their signals, which is kind of funny. William Camacho asking if Brock Bowers will travel with the team. Sometimes we have seen Georgia travel injured players. I remember George Pickens went to Auburn in 2021. I just kind of remember that. Richard LeCount, I believe, went with Georgia to Florida in 2020, maybe. At least one of those games he was injured, he traveled to. And that counts on your 70. Now, this year, the 70, I think, is a 74, isn't that right? So you can take a few more guys. Georgia has been willing to take an injured player among its 70 in the past. Georgia doesn't always play all 70 of the players that it takes. So they've done this in the past. I would say there's a chance that Brock does travel. And just because of the boost he perhaps provides the team, or just, the idea that if he wants to go, you would do, if you've got the spot available, you have a travel roster limit. If you've got the spot available, you would just give it to Brock because he wants it and he deserves, to get what he wants within reason. So I'll try to look for Brock on Saturday prior to the game and try to give you all an update. But perhaps that's the case. Also, Philip Jordan Wells, on the subject of Jordan Hall, that'd be a guy you'd love to see on Saturday have a nice game. That'd be a Brian Lindsay mentioning that too. Let's see what else. Brian also says be a great game for the defense to come out and look dominant. Totally agree with that. Johnny Prescott says, do I have a favorite Georgia-Florida memory from attending a game prior to becoming a member of the elite press corps? So I mentioned this before. 2004 was the very first game I ever got a chance to watch a game from the sideline, from the field. I'll tell you what I remember about that. I remember going to the tunnel where Georgia was running out from. I'd never experienced that before. The team running out onto the field and the way they congregate like right there in the mouth of that tunnel right before they run through the band. Band's playing, TV's kind of holding them. They want to wait and get it at just the right time. And then they bust out of that tunnel onto the field. Just kind of feel that energy. It feels like a herd of elephants or something just charging right at you. It just sort of feels so good. I always remember that. Something else that pops into mind, and maybe it's because he was just on our show. So in 2021, after Georgia beat Florida and what was starting to feel like it could be a special season for UGA, Braves were also in the World Series. And so Jeff Sentell and I, after the game, went over and had a nice dinner. This was back shortly after the pandemic when the world was still pretty weird. It's hard to look back on this, but in October of 2021, the world was still kind of a weird place. And it wasn't easy to find a spot to have a nice dinner in Jacksonville that night after the game. But Jeff and I kind of found a place going into the bar area there and sitting around and had a nice dinner. And they were kind of limiting who they were letting in the restaurant, but they did let us in. And there were some other Braves fans in there, a lot of Georgia fans in there too. And we just sort of, enjoying a Georgia win. I was against Florida and watching the Braves get a World Series win that night. That's one of my best recent memories of Georgia, Florida, a really, really good experience. And this year, I will tell you, while I'm going down there to work, I'm also taking my kids for the first time. They've never gotten a chance to go to a Georgia, Florida game, but they're kind of old enough now. We think they're able to do that, know how to process some of the weirdness they see from some of the adults around them. So we're looking forward to that. The game means a lot to me, and so I appreciate you asking that. Brian Lizzie says, yep, BA said my name. We win 49-10. Brian, I love that. That's really good stuff. Marshall Fleming also said that Nolan traveled last year but did not count against the number because he was declared unable to play. Is that right? Because I sort of feel like – is that I guess maybe I vaguely remember that, but there have been times in which Georgia has just taken an injured player and, they just travel with 68 healthy players or 69 healthy players. So some of this is a little bit probably non-specific and probably a little bit procedural and kind of clerical. Plus, the travel number's higher than it used to be. So the point is, if Georgia wants to take Bowers, it can do so without bumping up against its available players, because the truth is Georgia doesn't really play all 70 players that travels anyway, and now I think they can take 74 anyway. So, yeah. But I had forgotten that they deemed Nolan travelable, to make up a word, because he wasn't eligible to play. I didn't even – I only vaguely remember that, but they've taken injured players before. Philip Jordan Wells mentioning restaurants have kind of become drive-thrus now. Yeah, that's a weird byproduct of COVID. I'm not going to mention any proper names here because I don't want to, unfairly denigrate a restaurant, nor do I want to, give any free plugs. But there is one restaurant in particular that I really, really like, and it's never open. You can't, maybe it's changed now, but it's always drive-through only now. And that drives me crazy. And it's one of those things that no one would have ever done prior to COVID, but now they just sort of do it anytime they feel like it, drive-through only. You try to go and open the door. You got to go through the drive-through. I don't want to eat in the car. You get stuff all over you. I don't want to do that. I'm kind of, a messy eater as it is. So the drive-through only fast food or quick service, whatever you want to call it. If you're fancy, you call it quick service. The drive-through only quick service, I'm so annoyed by that. So annoyed by these places that don't open up the dining room anymore. And I can't quite figure out, why it's cheaper not to open the dining room. But somehow, some way, they're obviously saving a nickel on doing that because a lot of restaurants seem like they do it. The one that Philip mentioned is not the one that I'm thinking about, or whoever it was that mentioned that. Yeah, Philip is the one that mentioned that. There's another one that I'm not going to mention it by name. They are never open. Never open. It drives me insane. Octavius Oliver mentioning that Kirby also referenced the fact that Brock Bowers might travel, and earlier this week he did do that. Miriam Corbin says, come by the touchdown lot before the game and we'll feed you. Miriam, I'd love to see you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be dog walk. I got to go see our friends at the Bulldog Club of Jacksonville. Got to make an appearance with my good friend Kaylee Manziel at some point. But I'll try to come through the touchdown lot and anywhere else Georgia fans are as much as I can. I love this game. I love seeing Georgia fans. And Miriam, I always love seeing you on game day. So I would love to make that happen. Absolutely. Johnny Prescott says, does Gator taste like chicken? Never tried it. So true story here. A couple of years ago, it's been more than a couple now, for one of our Marlowe's events, the chef at the Marlowe's location we were at made fried gator tail. It was really good. It was kind of a lighter, fluffier version of chicken. I really liked it. And, you dip that in the right, sort of spicy sauce. I could see that being really good. But I enjoyed it very much so. Very much so. I once had like gator and gumbo one time. Kind of mixing with that one time. That's pretty good. Alan Verboncic says, I'm not allowed in the touchdown lot. Listen, I'm sure a lot of you have been kicked out of a lot of places in Jacksonville over the years. I'm sure a lot of you probably have. Ken Holcomb says up there in LJ where he lives, a lot of staffing shortages that make fast food joints drive through only. So, Ken, I have total respect for that, but I also sort of believe now, the same way like to me, and this is getting on a tangent, I won't get back to football after this. I feel like the statute of limitations on supply chain issues and staff shortages is over. And certainly I don't want to hear anything about, COVID concerns. Like I'm just done with all of that stuff. So at this point in time, I would say now up there, like you said, in North Georgia mountains, less dense population, there are just fewer people to hire. I do get that. But at a certain point in time, it's not a staff shortage. It's you not wanting to hire people. Not you, but whatever restaurant would sort of say this. Oh, we got a staff shortage, therefore the dining room's not open. We're sort of well past the limit on me buying stuff like that. So that's where I want to get on my soapbox there for a minute, for sure. Eric Dvornsey says, I hope we get off to a quick start this game. I do too. This would not be a good game to get off to a slow start. I agree with you. Florida, I don't know how much they believe in themselves right now. I think they probably have some confidence in the game. Steve Spurrier said yesterday they do. But you want to get confidence quick, a la Missouri last year or any number of other opponents, maybe South Carolina this year. You want to give somebody confidence quick, let them get off to a fast start against you. That's what you don't want if you're Georgia. Now, 2021, 2022, when Florida kind of threw its haymaker, Georgia just sort of found its extra gear, to mix metaphors, and coasted to an easy victory. Is this team quite as – in 2021 you could have done anything. I honestly believe you could have spotted the opponent 30 points and Georgia could have come out there and pretty much done whatever it wanted to. 2021 was just a different type of team, and 2022 probably was too. So it just may not be fair to judge this team compared to those two because that was just – I think you could have probably dealt them almost any hand and they would have found a way to kind of, figure it out. We're led to believe that Michigan perhaps had all their signals, and that still didn't stop Georgia from blowing them out. That gives you an idea of just how good Georgia was during that period of time. And when Florida came out and sort of struck first in 2021, Georgia struck back, and they struck back hard enough that Florida didn't want no more. And I don't know that it's fair to ask this team to do the same type of thing, so maybe don't ask them to. Come out and get off to your fast start, and then Florida's reminded quickly that it is a touchdown underdog. And from that standpoint, perhaps it plays that way. All right, we're going to get ready to go in a couple of minutes. Let's see what else. Memphis Dog says, I always drive away if a restaurant doesn't have the dining room open. Yeah, at this point in time, I do there as well. I've got no patience for that. Timothy Wilson says, what's everyone's tailgating food for tomorrow? We're doing ribeye steak with the Hawaiian slider buns. I do love, like when he's talking about those, those very, very sweet buns they sell at the grocery store at your local Kroger. I love those things, and for sliders in particular. And, it's like you take like a, leftover steak or, leftover roast or something like that. You put a little like Swiss cheese on that, heat it back up, put it on those sweet buns like that. That is a good meal, man. A little bit of sauce to dip it in or something. That's a good one right there. Timothy, it sounds like y'all going to have a great game day. Nature Gator says that gator tail doesn't taste like chicken to him unless the chicken is fried in heavy lard. Well, how else do you eat chicken other than fried with heavy lard? Do they make chicken a different kind of way than that? That's what chicken is to me. I didn't know they made chicken another way other than that. Todd Greer, I didn't know this. I'll give the free plug here. So King's Hawaiian Rolls are made in Gainesville, Georgia. I didn't know that. I'm from Gainesville. I guess I thought they were made in Hawaii, to be totally honest with you. But I do love the King's Hawaiian Rolls, which is, a free plug. But I did not know they were made in Gainesville, Georgia. I knew there was a lot of, obviously, sort of the, food, obviously great, food processing that takes place there in the Gainesville area. But I did not know that King's Hawaiian rolls were made in Gainesville, Georgia. And so now Paul Moon's let me know that Texas Pete hot sauce is made in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Like, what is going on in the world? I'm from Gainesville. Come to find out, King's Hawaiian rolls are made in Gainesville, and Texas Pete's made in Winston-Salem. Lord, what is the world coming to? John McAleer on the game we're doing tonight. So at one point in time, to be completely transparent, we actually were going to do Rome tonight against Creekview. We have, for 1,000 reasons, switched up to a different game, and I'm really excited about this. Tonight, we get a chance to see Grayson at Archer tonight. And I tell you, I actually talked to Dante Williams, the Archer coach, this morning for a little while. This is going to be a really, really fun football game. First of all, if you care about high school football, this is the craziest region in the state right now, and perhaps arguably the deepest there, too. Had a big upset last night in a Thursday night game. South Gwinnett knocked off Newton, who has had one of the best years it's had in forever. Grayson kind of off to a slow start this season, but they've kind of figured it out right now. Tyler Atkinson, the tremendous edge rusher there for Grayson's a really fun player. And Archer, after a two-win season a year ago, a complete turnaround in the second year for Dante Williams at coach. This is a really, really, really fun thing here right now. So you'll love this. Archer and Grayson tonight on the Peachtree Sports Network. I'm really excited about that. Paul Moon says, when I was at Wake Forest as a student, they often had the B school kids do stuff for Texas Pete ads and assignments and stuff. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that. I thought the only thing that came out of Winston-Salem was cigarettes, I believe, honestly. But nonetheless. Let's see what else. 478 Dog he's put this coming in a couple times. He says, playing on the road against anyone's not easy. I believe that's his way of insinuating the Georgia-Florida game is a road game. If that be the case, there are a lot of Georgia fans traveling to that road game. But obviously, I realize it's a controversial topic, and everybody sort of got their own feelings on that. G. Greg's Bama Boy going back at 478. Maybe 478 was mentioning something different, but obviously a lot of folks have opinions about where this game should be played. I certainly do get that. All right, we got to go for now, y'all. Really good stuff. We'll be back Monday with more comments. Join us for our post-game show as well coming up on Saturday, too. We've had some great calls the last few games. It's really been a fun, spirited conversation, and on Saturday it's a chance to celebrate a win against the lousy, stinking Gators, and that's a good reason to show up. I'll be there in Jacksonville. You can join us there, too. We will have a great time. So we'll see you there for that. Thanks for being here for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. By the way, Dari from R.S. Andrews is in Jacksonville here this weekend, too, so that is really fun. And they'll also take care of you for whatever you may need. It's actually warm right now, so if your air conditioning is not quite working the way you want it to, get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Our friends at R.S. Andrews can help you out with that. It's maybe that tune-up could only cost you $99. So find them out online to see more on that. rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you for the cocktail party tomorrow in Jacksonville. And then back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.